Welcome back to the Wingspan Podcast, episode 18. I'm Doug Barak, joined by my co-host Chris Mulholland of Nets Daily and our special guest. Our guest is an NBA writer for Basketball Insiders.
We welcome Ben Nadeau to the podcast. Thank you for taking some time every day to join Doug and I. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, you guys. Hanging in there, as I assume you guys are as well.
Day by day.
Day by day, trying to stay busy.
I think Doug asked me to come on this podcast a long time ago, so it took me until episode 18, but happy to chat with you guys.
Well, in the Jewish religion,
that's
a chai, which is pretty much good luck. So we got that going for us.
So the first thing we'll just kick it off straight away is, can you just talk a little about your journey, kind of what college you went to, your first sports media position or internship?
Sure. So I went to Emerson College, which is a small liberal arts school in Boston, and originally got in to do print journalism. And then before my freshman year even started, I switched to writing, literature, and publishing, and decided that I was going to pursue journalism on the side, which eventually brought me to the Brooklyn Game, which is a net-centric podcast that you guys are probably all familiar with, and those that listen to this podcast, that I wrote at starting in 2012 and was in some capacity with until 2017. So was with them for a good long time and kind of worked my way up from just doing tweets and social media things and headlines to doing full-fledged articles and eventually managing the entire website.
And then you want to just talk a little about kind of your experience at the Brooklyn Game. What was it like covering the team and kind of just overall takeaways from that time?
Yeah, it couldn't have been a more perfect place for me to kind of start my sports writing journey. Again, as many of you are familiar, Devin there was particularly awesome, always took the time to make sure I was headed in the right direction, that I was writing better, and even throughout all my college workshop writing classes and publishing, editing, stuff like that, I don't think I grew as much as I did as a writer during those 4 years than when I was getting advice and guidance from Devin. So I don't know if I'd be where I was today without him. So kind of the perfect way to kick all that off for me, learning the ins and outs of basketball, how sports media works, even covered a couple games with them, with Devin at my side. So for a pretty nervous and anxious kid, I count a lot of my blessings because of him and my start at that website.
Yeah, no, definitely. And since you just mentioned Devin, because of him, we actually met that one time in Manhattan for Darren Williams' Celebrity Dodge Barrage. So all the way back, I think it was shortly after we started talking, I guess, when Plumlee played Summer League in 2013. It's when I first started following you, and then we met at Dodge Barrage. And you guys were playing, I think, even with Dexter Henry, formerly of Nets Daily at the time. So that was a very interesting time and a very cool way to meet up.
That one, I had not forgotten about it, but when I was prepping for this podcast, I didn't even think about it. I remember when that was all going down and Devin was like, hey, got an extra ticket, you want to come? Eventually you won that fan giveaway that I believe we did on the website. And he was like, there's a really small chance that you'll get to play, but don't count on it. I remember bringing a backpack throughout Manhattan that whole day, just praying that someone would ask me to play. And I got to play in that one game, and that was an experience I'll never forget for sure, particularly because they had just Red Bull everywhere. No water, just Red Bull everywhere, which felt a little unsafe for a dodgeball tournament. But that was the first time Doug and I ever met in person, which was a very cool experience for sure.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, we, from being shy about meeting Hollins to checking out Plumlee after he got back from winning his gold, meeting Karasev, Markel, like so many names that like how long you've been a Nets fan kind of question. You ask people like, who are these guys? And it's interesting to see where the team's gone from there. So it's definitely interesting to talk about later on. And then the other very cool thing about that was just the reaction, the energy that you guys brought into the game. So that was fun to watch for sure.
Yeah, I don't want to say that the dodgeball tournament was all about my very minor cameo appearance, but I won't say it wasn't.
And then on top of that, one thing, kind of just backtrack a little bit back to your college days. Were there any type of mentors that kind of led you in the right way, kind of what you learned, picked up from, and kind of helped you adjust to the field of journalism?
Truly, it was just Devin. I wasn't taking any journalism classes at Emerson. I was doing like writing and nonfiction workshops, which, they have their similarities to journalism, but it's a completely different animal. And at that time, I had written for my high school newspaper, but I remember thinking that if this was something I was going to try and pursue on the side in whatever capacity, obviously I never thought that I would get as far as I have anyways. That covering the Nets, which was the team that I had grown up watching, would be a good start. So when I saw on Twitter that they were looking for contributors, I just threw my hat in the ring. And it truly, literally, until the last couple of years when I moved on to Basketball Insiders, had been just Devin. And I owe a whole lot to him. And other than professors here and there teaching me fiction, he would be the sole mentor, I would have to say.
And then where are you from originally?
I'm from Portland, Maine.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And what's life like up there in Maine?
It's great. I think Maine has a fair rap in a lot of instances, but Portland's actually very liberal and very great. It's the kind of place where I always tell people that if I hadn't lived there for the first 18 years of my life, I would be happy to settle down there and live there forever. It's very poppin'. Even since I graduated high school, they've been weirdly turning into this foodie town with breweries and fancy food cars and stuff like that. And it's a city on the way up. So if you've never been there, I highly suggest it.
I did do a drive-through.
The farthest I went to Maine was the farthest up that coast I went was probably Rhode Island, just visit some friends at college. But it also came to my mind too. So you mentioned that you grew up a Nets fan and stuff. So what led you to kind of rooting for the Nets?
I'm sure Doug has heard the story before, but growing up, originally the only team I really had a lot of strong feelings for were the Red Sox. And being a Red Sox fan, the only rule that you had basically was that you hated the Yankees. Mm-hmm. So when I was getting into basketball, which was around 2002, 2003, which was right around when the Nets were busy getting waxed in back-to-back finals, I was trying to figure out what team I was going to support. And I loved Jason Kidd, loved being pass first point guard. I really, for some reason, disliked Paul Pierce and Antoine Walker. And if I wasn't going to be a Celtics fan, the next closest team was the Knicks. And because of my anti-Yankees feelings, the next closest team after that was the New Jersey Nets. So it's not exactly a glamorous story because, of course, the Nets traded for Paul Pierce and moved to Brooklyn. But that's kind of my origin story on that regard.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because everyone's got different stories when it comes to kind of rooting for a team, whether it's in your own state or how close it is, or whether you grew up getting tickets from your parents and stuff like that. But that's definitely an interesting story. I got to give it to you.
I do not even really remember why I grew up hating Paul Pierce and Antoine Walker. I have memories of watching Pacers Celtics series and stuff like that, but not really understanding why. I think I probably just wanted to be a little different at the time, but it had been a long journey rooting for the Nets long before I even started writing about them. from those losing seasons to rooting for Chris Humphries to not get
I remember
the
that.
one pick the year that John Wall was in the draft and not even getting the number 2 pick, to some of the more obvious stuff like trading for Gerald Wallace with the pick that turned into Damian Lillard and going all in on Joe Johnson and all that fun stuff. So as you guys are well aware, it's a long and torturous history.
Yeah, for sure. And I do remember your fandom or mild standing of Humphreys at the time. I do remember that now.
I will still die on that hill. And that, I mean, the worst thing that guy ever did was fall in love with a terrible person. He always tried hard. He never played with outside of his means. He was a rebounding machine. By all accounts, he was a nice dude. He just fell in with the wrong person,
crowd. Yeah.
So all that booing, all that countrywide hate that he got, I never really understood that.
And then what was it like kind of covering a team that you grew up watching and you were a fan of?
It was definitely interesting, and that was long before I ever made it into a locker room or anything like that, especially when I was doing that in 2012. It was their first year in Brooklyn, so they went those 7 games in the first round was Chicago that ended in heartbreak. But shortly thereafter, following the Pierce and Garnett trade, things got pretty dark there for a while. So there was never really this feeling of, oh, this team that I've liked for a decade plus is suddenly amazing and I get to cover them. It was kind of like, wow, this is the 4th year of them being horrible and not having a draft pick. And, it kind of became routine in a lot of ways. Doug mentioned earlier picking up these second round G League guys that you could really hitch your wagon to just because there was really nothing else going on, like Karasev and Toko and all those guys that, we could probably talk about all day. But I think during those times, it was the most fun just to get behind those guys who were trying to make an impact and root for them because there was literally nothing else going on.
Yeah, no, definitely dark and interesting times. And unfortunately, not a lot of them are playing the sport locally, that's for sure. So although we specifically mentioned the Nets, so did you start officially watching the NBA with the Nets? And if yes, if not, what was your first memory of the league?
It's pretty cloudy, but I do think it was back in 2002 or 2003, whenever they were good. So I'm afraid to admit that my initial liking of the Nets was probably bandwagon-y, which is kind of the irony in saying that I bandwagoned the Nets is incredible. But I think my first real Nets memory, for Christmas one year, my dad got 2 basketball jerseys, and it was the year that the Nets and Spurs played in the finals. And he gave me first choice as the oldest sibling. I could either have a Tim Duncan jersey or a Richard Jefferson jersey. And I picked the RJ jersey, and I think once you own a jersey of a team as a 10 or 12-year-old, like, it's written in the stars and you can't do anything to change that. So oddly enough, my first Nets memory, I think, was probably getting that Richard Jefferson jersey and kind of falling in love with the team from there, even though they were getting crushed in the finals. But that love only escalated once they traded for Vince Carter, and you had this alley-oop tandem, and it was fun to root for a team that wasn't my hometown team. And I think that is what made me latch on to them so much.
That's very cool. And then seeing that it seems a little more recent, when did covering the NBA kind of become more of a dream and focus for you?
I mean, it had always been in the back of my mind. I knew that switching my major in school would probably make that a little bit harder At the time when I started the Brooklyn game, I kind of thought it would just be a fun thing to do on the side that would, one, keep my writing skills sharp and improving. But if I was watching every Nets game already, then why not write about them? And it wasn't until a few years later, probably after years of driving Devin insane, that it kind of dawned on me that it was a path that I could keep pushing forward with and kind of expand and see where it goes. But it definitely took me a while. For quite a bit, I was just doing it for fun as a side thing in college that I could share and talk about and say, hey, I might not be a published author yet, but I am writing about basketball and Chris Humphries and having a great time.
Yeah, no, that's really the heart and soul of things. So it's strange to be in a time where the NBA is on a pause and stuff like that, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is in that situation. But what were some of the most memorable experiences prior to the Sean Marks era that you could, reminisce about?
Boy. I just, for some reason, and you can ask any of my friends, given that the memories were kind of few and far between for quite some time, I would have to say, even before I started writing about them, I guess semi-professionally or professionally, or however you want to describe it, because that's all very a blurry line these days. But growing up in high school and college, especially when they were particularly bad, I got a lot of hate from roommates, friends, new friends, coworkers, just hating on my fandom. Like, why would you be a Nets fan? Like, all this stuff. So I kind of take it as a badge of honor after all these years, and those are the memories that I'll take from it. Growing up, I had Lakers friends with Kobe and Celtics fans with Paul Pierce and Ray Allen and KG and Rockets fans who loved T-Mac and Yao Ming, and just the Nets were plodding along the whole time and not getting really any better. So I would say that some of my favorite memories were definitely the Vince Carter era, which was well before Sean Marks, but even just those small moments that you would never remember about now, like Jarrett Jack's winner.
One Pow Wow shuffle.
Yeah.
One Pow Wow shuffle. Yeah.
Loved watching Kirilenko those few times he was able to get a good stretch of games going. I keep going back to this rooting for the underdog thing. And it almost didn't matter if they were winning or losing, but I was having fun supporting a team that at the time I felt really needed all the support it could get.
No, definitely. And you also brought up a very important, very relevant name, Vince Carter, who may or may not have already played his last game. So just in your opinion, do you think someone like who gave everything, for the small time he did, should get his jersey retired? Like, should we see number 15 in the rafters soon?
Oh, I would say without a doubt. I know that his time was not the longest ever with the Nets, but still there's the cultural impact that he made on the sport of basketball. The other day I was looking through Twitter, actually, and I believe it was Rachel Nichols who tweeted, today would have been Vince's last presumed game had the season not been stopped. So here are some great highlights, and I hadn't even thought of that. So right then and there, I pulled up a YouTube video of his top 50 or whatever plays and sat there watching it while I ate dinner. And my girlfriend, who admittedly is not the biggest basketball fan yet, but is trying, even was just awestruck at the stuff that he used to do, jumping over that French basketball player, the windmills, the dunk contest stuff. Like, even if he's not going to go down as one of the absolute greatest of all time, his longevity and the cultural impact that he had on basketball, the Nets should absolutely retire his jersey like tomorrow.
Sounds good to me.
And then what do you feel about, I know we had Arina Pavlova on the pod, and she recommended that the Nets should consider changing the banners to New Jersey colors for the players that kind of made their mark while in the New Jersey days. Are you a fan of, say, Vince Carter got his number retired? Would you be a fan of having the banners in New Jersey colors, or would you rather have it as it is and keep kind of that Brooklyn branding and have Brooklyn everything?
Oh, no. You got to go historical on those. I've never understood those teams that kind of shied away from their history. And you just got to embrace that, especially if it was one of those shining moments in the New Jersey Nets era of franchise history. You got to embrace that. I know a popular thing on Twitter lately has been asking for New Jersey Nets throwbacks to be worn. And I get it. I was one of them and still am in a lot of ways. One of those people who went through a lot while watching the Nets as a teenager, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to celebrate that type of stuff. So I would certainly opt for the old school banners.
And then since you brought up the jerseys, I was going to bring that up a little earlier in the pod. Anything kind of stick out to you that hey, this jersey is what they should pursue, like color-wise and design-wise? Are you one of those guys that have just the vintage white with the big Nets written on the jersey? Are you more of the ones from the past days with the light blue? Kind of what's your feelings on the throwbacks, and which ones would you want to see?
I do love the blue and red ones, like Drazen era jerseys, personally. And further, and I know that this is probably a little bit of a hot take, I'm not like dying for the Nets to wear those gray throwbacks, to be honest. I've seen them recently with photoshops of Kyrie and KD in them, and they look nice, but I'm not willing to die on that hill, you know. That being said, they could definitely take some of that influence and stick them in some new Brooklyn era designs, because I think they've had those alternates, and some of them have been misses, in my opinion, and it's hard to make a good jersey every single time. So I'm not dying to see those gray ones from the Izod Center era, but I think basketball and why we're struggling right now is because at its core it's about having fun and telling stories, and if we want to have those old school jerseys, like, that's a fun thing. So let's do it. Let's do all of it.
No, yeah, I agree with that. And I'm a big fan of the Drazen jerseys as well, the light blues. And I just feel, to give my personal take on it, I just feel like something to have, whether it's just the basic old Nets design that's written on the chest, red and white, you could rock that as well. And I would say they should maybe throw in a New Jersey-based logo, something with New Jersey on it, to show that, hey, they're representing the history with pride. So that's my kind of take on it. But it's going to be interesting to see kind of how they come up with designs and kind of correlate it with their new branding in Brooklyn. But with that said, let's kind of just move on to the Sean Marks era. So first, we'll kind of just begin. We'll trace it all the way back to the hiring of Kenny Atkinson. What was kind of your thoughts on that whole run in his tenure, and mostly the impact he made on mostly development and culture out of anything?
Yeah, I think you nailed it right on the head, and obviously that's the stuff that he's hailed for even today, and will be the reason why he gets his next job, wherever it may be, that his culture and the development of the very obvious guys like Spencer, Karras, Joe, cannot be understated, really. He took on a very tough project with kind of no end goal in sight, and he molded this team. He was part of that culture, that family first atmosphere, and I don't think the Nets would be where they are today, particularly with KD and Kyrie, if not for all of Atkinson's hard work that he did with guys that had kind of been thrown to the scrap heap of the NBA, all things considered. So I know the follow-up question will probably be about his dismissal, but I think he kind of got a raw job at the end a little bit, because even when the Nets weren't winning, they were very entertaining, and you could see these guys improving and developing every single game, every single season. And, Kyrie didn't play very much this year, so it's kind of a tough pill to swallow to see him go in that fashion.
Mm-hmm. And then before we discuss kind of what you mentioned, the dismissal, the hard stuff, let's get to the kind of a bright side. And we all agree that Kenny will be a coach in the league next season, or if the season kind of whenever things start to get back on track. Out of the list of teams, I know obviously as the offseason approaches closer, a lot of head coaching vacancies are going to open up. But what are some teams that kind of pop in your head right away that Kenny could make a real impact on?
Well, the Knicks, for starters. That one seems a bit too on the nose, and I don't know if he'd be willing to coach the Nets rival like that. But they're not in a totally dissimilar situation to that of the Nets from a few years ago, in that they have tons of young, talented pieces, but kind of need someone to put their head on straight. Kevin Knox, Frank Ntilikina, Alonzo Trier, Mitchell Robinson. The Knicks have a ton of talent, and, you think someone like Atkinson could probably do a fair bit of good for a team like that. But if the Knicks are out of the running, I think the Cavs, if they decide that they don't want to do some kind of long-term thing with Bickerstaff, I know that they seem committed to that for now, but who knows? They're basically any team with a bunch of young talent, young draft picks that need that kind of direction and development before they can even start thinking about making the playoffs, because he was perfect for that role.
Yeah,
in Brooklyn.
Yeah, no, definitely. Chris and I have brought up this question a few times, and some of our choices. My top that I'm now stuck on is the Kings. I think that's a nice young guard core.
Not a Luke Walton fan?
No, he didn't prove himself to me when he had that amazing start with the Warriors, with all that talent there. To me, what makes coaches is not just the ability to coach such prestigious players, is also to control the youth as well. Like, that's what makes, if you can do a little bit of both, kind of like a Spoelstra guy who can do a little bit of both. Like, to me, those are basically the best coaches in the league, can deal with rebuilding, whether it's full or not, and then obviously managing such big names.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the disappointing part about the Atkinson thing, is that we did see him do the culture, we did see him do the rebuilding thing, but we didn't get a shot to see him as the leader of this team with like legit expectations. And that's probably the thing that will kind of disappoint me the most about the end of that era, because at the very least, I thought he deserved a shot to see how it would go.
Definitely.
Yeah, and then what my take on it as well, to get back onto Atkinson, is I think that he's a perfect fit for the Knicks. I saw a couple things on Twitter when it was a big topic, and a lot of people were like, how could this guy take a Knicks job if they're the Nets rival? Mostly the end story is a job's a job, and obviously it's very hard for coaches to get jobs in the NBA because it's very limited. So my kind of take on that is, since the Nets made the decision to let him go, there should be really no hard feelings if he does take the Knicks job, because he's not with the Nets anymore. He's he's a free agent coach, so he could choose where he wants to go. But it's going to be interesting to kind of see where everything kind of takes place and sees what opportunities come his way. He's definitely going to be a sought after free agent. So that's one thing for sure. But to transition a little bit, getting closer to today, let's just talk about 2018, 2019 playoff push. Kind of what were your impressions of last season's postseason, like with D'Angelo Russell against the Sixers and all that? What was your kind of thoughts on that?
That was genuinely exciting stuff. For them to make their return to the playoffs like that, even steal a game from the Sixers, who at the time were, kind of the NBA's darling. It's kind of interesting to see how that narrative has switched in a few years' time. But that was thrilling edge of your seat stuff. The Jared Dudley saga is something that I will always remember fondly. Even as an outsider now, I don't write a whole lot about the Nets anymore, but it was nice to cover them and watch that run and see Karas's emergence and Dinwiddie's shot making. It was a very special Nets season in a lot of ways. That it's weird that D'Angelo was on his way out after that, but when you get the chance to upgrade to Kyrie and KD, you obviously have to take that. But it was mostly just nice to see the Nets playing games again that mattered.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. And then what do you think of the clean sweep this offseason? Obviously, that kind of speaks for itself, landing the 2 top free agents and kind of just the projection of it. What was your reaction when you found out that KD and Kyrie chose to come to Brooklyn?
That was there had been whispers, I believe, like it was pretty close to the free agent date that the whispers got stronger. And even as someone who's not a fan anymore, you're like, that would be exciting, but you can't get your hopes up at all because the Nets have been hurt and burned and used in those type of situations so many times before. You know, you think back to 2010 with LeBron and Bosh, and the year that the Knicks got Amari, and the Nets emerged with Johan Petro and Jordan Farmar and Travis Outlaw. And the Nets just don't always make big free agent splashes. So even when those whispers were getting louder, you didn't want to listen to them just because history has taught you otherwise. But that was a big day for basketball, and obviously the Nets, because they had gone through this huge rebuild, which in a lot of ways had no light at the end of the tunnel, and emerged with all of these contributors that we had mentioned before, tons of cap space, a general manager that knew what he was doing, a head coach that looked like he was on his way up in the league, and for years that idea of culture was being touted, and you never really knew what it was going to amount to. But attracting Kyrie and KD, even if they, for conversation's sake, don't go on to win a title with the Nets, that's franchise altering and will make them players in the New York scene and in the league at large for forever. So that was the day that not only changed the NBA, but kind of the course of the Nets franchise as a whole forever.
And then what do you think the expectations are for this team while Durant and Irving are under contract for the team? How many, is it a championship? Is it a number of championships? Is it just kind of a broad perspective of, okay, put the Nets on the map and really make them a type of team that the whole nation, the whole NBA world kind of threatens? Or kind of what's your take on the expectations with the 2 superstars on the team?
I mean, the expectation still has to be a championship. They wouldn't have teamed up together if that wasn't their goal. But I think it's important to temper them. Of course, at the end of the day, only one team can win a championship, and you've got the Lakers and Clippers, and the Warriors will be back next year, and the Bucks as long as Giannis is there. And I always shudder, and this is more of a rings or bust conversation when you talk about seasons being measured in failures or successes only on the merit of whether or not they won a ring. And it kind of goes back to where I said that even if the Nets don't win a ring with KD and Kyrie, this will have been considered a success because it was the moment that put the Nets on the worldwide map and as threatening players within the league. The expectation still has to be at least one ring, but we'll have to wait and see, KD post injury, have to see if Kyrie's good from here on out now. have to see if Jared Allen can kind of keep growing. He was getting there, but he still had his inconsistencies, whether or not they can fit Dinwiddie and Karras and keep Joe whenever this offseason comes up. But the expectation still has to be a ring, maybe multiple, but you can't measure the success or failure on this rebuild, which is now over, on whether or not they win a ring, because it's very clearly been successful, in my opinion, already.
That's a good way of looking at it.
And then, yeah, you brought up the point, too, of the inconsistency and kind of how to balance stars, which was kind of lead up to my next question is, do you think that the Nets are going to actually pull the trigger and try to get a player like Bradley Beal or a third caliber star to kind of correlate with a championship-ready roster? Or do you think that it's going to be more of, okay, kind of stick with what we got, maybe add a veteran or a role player or two? What do you think their approach, or what do you think their kind of mindset is heading into the offseason?
God, that's a tough one. Because in a lot of ways, it both proves and contradicts kind of the learnings that we've come to know Sean Marks about, in that he is this culture-first builder. And it would probably pain him to trade a Karras. It would pain him to trade Dinwiddie or Jared Allen or whoever it might take to pry away a Bradley Beal. But at the same time, Marks has made it very clear before that this is all business first. And I'm not really sure what will go down. I feel like we're kind of reaching a crossroad point in which they might go all in on another star. And Bradley Beal would be fun as hell to watch. He's one of the most fun players in the entire league to watch, and pairing him with KD and Kyrie would be fantastic. But at what cost? You know, I don't know. It's very hard to tell, and I think we're gonna have to wait and see how this post coronavirus landscape kind of unfolds for us. And, you know, it might be the kind of decision that has to wait until, say, Giannis is a free agent. And what if Giannis heads to the Western Conference? Then the Eastern Conference is wide open in a lot of ways. And you could be more beholden to make some kind of all-in move like that. So I think right now you can't really make any type of move until you see what you have on the court with Kyrie and KD post-injury. But I wouldn't doubt Marks in any way for making some kind of long-term move like that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, and it's uncertainty as of now. You don't know with the Nets. You don't know what they're kind of pull together, especially if a trade deadline comes around. I know that's an exciting time for Nets fans to see if Marks will gather up second-round picks like he usually does. But in the offseason, it's always give or take. And now that the expectations are at all-time high for this franchise, it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of correlate with other teams and see what players they could bring in and who they kind of ship out and stuff. But kind of just the final question to touch up on the current Nets era. Who do you think is a good candidate for the vacant head coaching spot? Well, it's not vacant, but Jack Vaughn is doing, or at least he did a good job while the league was still going on. But there's a guy like Tom Thibodeau, Jeff Van Gundy, Mark Jackson. Who are some of the guys that kind of ring your bell and could be a great fit for this team?
Well, none of those guys. With all due respect to those guys who have proven themselves and won countless awards and racked up the wins in this league, but I would really truly not like to see one of those guys you just named to be the next head coach. And it's probably not Vaughn either, although I will agree that he had done a fine job in the few weeks that he got to do so. But you see it all the time, particularly in the NFL, and they've started to get away from it. Taking a swing, which is what they did with Atkinson in the first place, I think is the kind of bold move that the Nets have been willing to make in the past and will be willing to make again. And obviously the next head coaching hire is so important in so many ways, and that it could really erase a lot of the progress that they had made in the last recent years if they get it wrong. But I don't know if it's a college coach or a current assistant, but I think the league has kind of moved on from a few of those guys that you had mentioned, and I don't particularly think that they're the way forward for the Nets. Nor do I think a Popovich is even in the realm of possibility. So that's a tough question. There's one name that is now escaping me. Perhaps it's probably Mike D'Antoni. I think if those kind of contract talks don't go well, or if they'll even happen to get at all, he's kind of one of the few veteran coaches that I would certainly be interested in seeing coaching this fast-paced, up-tempo, three-point launching team is D'Antoni for sure. So maybe I'll go with him. But if not D'Antoni, then not another old guy, and go big and bold.
Sounds
I like
good.
it. I like it.
Yeah, you never know because we were dealing with uncharted territory. So, anyways, so other than the Nets, what have been some of your most memorable moments covering the NBA thus far?
Ooh, yeah. I think once I started getting into locker rooms more consistently, working at Basketball Insiders opened a lot of doors for me in that way. I was still living in Boston at the time, so I was covering Celtics games and spent a lot of time in away locker rooms, mostly interviewing rookies, international players, just to keep my feet wet. And then, of course, I moved to the West Coast, so that kind of stopped. But in the 2 years that I did that, it was kind of a game changer for me in a lot of ways to see the inner workings of even arena hallways and locker rooms and being near people that I had never even thought of being near before, like Dwight Howard and Vlade Divac in particular. I remember walking by them in the hallways down by the Celtics locker rooms and just being like, that guy could probably kill me just by looking at me with a very stern glare. They're just, when you watch the game, sometimes you catch yourself thinking, oh, that guy's pretty big, or that guy seems pretty small when he's guarded by Kawhi or Giannis, or Anthony Davis makes that guy look small. They're all so much bigger than you. I think that was one of my biggest initial takeaways by getting down there, was how big these guys really are and how incredible they are as athletes. You want to be a backseat couch watcher sometimes, where you're like, oh, how do you miss that shot? But these guys are all incredible athletes, and I would not want to fight Vlade Divac, basically, is my big takeaway. That guy is the largest human I've ever been by in my life.
Man, I have to think about that. The closest I was to Dwight was that one time I won courtside seats with my dad, and that was impressive. But thankfully the Nets won, so that made my fear of Dwight Howard a little bit less. But another thing is, that you can recall, what was the most influential, interesting interview that either you led or were a part of during those locker room sessions?
Yeah, I did a whole lot of them that I was very proud of at Basketball Insiders, and I haven't done an interview in a while, so my memory is a little hazy, but I interviewed Dario Saric when he was still on Philadelphia, and we ended up talking about the longtime rivalry between the Celtics and Sixers, which, goes back decades and decades and decades. And I remember chatting with him when he was growing up. His father, who was a professional basketball player in his own country, would show Dario these highlights between the Celtics and Sixers and Larry Bird and Dr. J and all those old school era highlights. And I just remember Dario being so amazed that he got to be part of that rivalry now, and how grateful he was, and how he was ready to work and make sure that the Sixers would look at him in the same way someday. And, he's on Phoenix now, and those type of things don't work out all the time. But that was an interview that I really loved. Willie Hernan-Gomez, when he first got to Charlotte, was incredibly nice and grateful with his time. Nicholas Batum was another one. The first interview I ever did was with Bogdan Bogdanovic, and he was spectacular too. It seems like going into it, I was kind of worried about being annoying to people or not doing my job well. But a lot of these guys are our age and just want to do a nice thing and give good answers and be grateful. And I don't think I left a lot of interviews being like, wow, that guy was a jerk, or wow, that guy didn't even want to look at me. And very grateful for the time that I got to spend in locker rooms so far. And I love talking to all of them.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, Chris 100% can relate, especially with his time with the Long Island Nets. And then we've had previous guests who were even kind of taken under their wing to let them expand in that interviewing role, like Alex Kennedy with Magic, for example. So, we love hearing those kind of stories where, they're not just guys who ball out on the court or just about the money, or the fans. They're also about the media, giving them a chance to grow too, just like they are. So love hearing that.
Well, yeah, I mean, granted, part of it was like my own insecurities about trying to approach a superstar, but I mean, you touched on it. They have won a million times over. They have more money than they'll ever need. Like, I was far more interested in kind of talking to guys about their stories and how far they had come to reach the NBA. So like I said before, I was doing a lot of my interviews with rookies and second round picks and talking about how they were adjusting to the NBA, what was different, what was it like to play against so-and-so for the first time. And I'm trying to fill time while I find some of those examples in the background on my computer. But I talked to Luke Kennard. I talked to Karras before his breakout, Jared Allen. It felt a lot more important for me to tell a story instead of, oh, such and such is so good at basketball. Of course they're good at basketball. They're in the NBA, I think a lot of times it's more fascinating to see what got them there and their influences and the idea of playing overseas. I did this long interview a long time ago over the phone with Darius Adams, who's one of the best players in the CBA at the time, and he was averaging like a 40-point triple-double. And we basically just talked for an hour about how it was ridiculous that he wasn't getting NBA opportunities. Like, at that point, what do you have to do? And how life in China was so much different than playing over here, and the workouts that he did with certain teams that didn't pan out. And those are the type of things that I wanted to tell throughout my writing.
Yeah, no, definitely. Of some of the writers, I definitely recall you always putting your own emotions into the story, where you can tell you're writing, then it's not just any other person writing the story. Like, you put yourself, your personality into the story, and, that's what makes it worth reading. So I always appreciate that, Ben.
Thank you, man. That means a lot.
Of course. And my last question before Chris does the final one is, with the global pandemic of COVID-19 putting the world at a halt, when do you see sports returning, and how do you think each league will handle things? You don't have to name every league. I know there's so many of them, but, those that you personally follow or cover.
I think it's been very interesting to watch these teams kind of go through their 5 stages of acceptance right now. Even the NBA, which has a rep for being super progressive, has even been like, we got to do anything we can to save this season. Because the harsh reality of it is that they're losing money every single day. You see overseas leagues like the Bundesliga that waited way too long to stop having German soccer games, or the CBA, which we just found out was planning on starting their basketball season again and had to walk that back. Or the MLB, which is talking about that interesting putting everyone in Arizona plan and just playing the season out as if nothing had happened without fans, stuff like that. And I don't really know. I think we talked about this a little bit before the podcast started, that I do miss sports, but I'm kind of largely uninterested in learning about these makeshift plans to bring the league back before we have regular society under control, which very well could be a long time. And given obvious circumstances, I think sports were often an escape for a lot of people, but it's not something we should be too worried about. You know, you hear about the Premier League thinking about doing a shortened season in order to finish their campaign up and get finances in order and get the Champions League spots all sorted out. And maybe even sneak Euros in, which seems like a ridiculous thing to even consider at this point. But at the end of the day, I'll be on my couch or at the arena, wherever, whatever sport it may be when those open up. But I'm trying not to get too caught up in all that because there are so many other important things going on right now that need our focus. I do trust Adam Silver and his team to do whatever's right, whatever makes sense, whatever alterations we have to have to the season next year, whether that's shortened games or starting at Christmas or doing a weird off season, because he's proven time and time again to be one of the more progressive and thoughtful voices of all the commissioners. So I do trust in Silver, but it's not something that I'm using a lot of mental capacity on at this point because it's a lot of darkness out there too.
Yeah.
And then speaking of being on the couch, obviously with all of us inside, what, on a personal note, kind of to end off the podcast, what have you been up to? Kind of how have you been trying to stay busy, stay productive? Are you a movie guy? More of TV shows, video games? Like what has Ben been up to since all this is going on?
A little bit of everything. Started collecting vinyl again. I won a record player about a month ago in a Valentine's Day giveaway, and I've kind of been going crazy with buying vinyl. So that is one thing that I've been doing a lot. I have, of course, been playing Animal Crossing. Perhaps a little too much, but
I got the GameCube version of that one. It's pretty good.
That's the OG one.
That's the OG one, yeah.
Yeah, this is a side tangent, but years ago, in one of my first off-campus apartments, my apartment got robbed while everyone was off on spring break, and a couple of people in my apartment had laptops stolen, so it's hard for me to complain too much about it, but I had all of my video games on this big, long shelf above the fireplace. They seemingly grabbed like a random handful out and managed to get my copy of Animal Crossing on the GameCube, and it has haunted me to this day. So I'm very happy to have Animal Crossing on the Switch back in my life. I am watching Community again, introducing that to some new people in my life. Trying to keep up on movies. I know Doug follows me on Letterboxd, but doing movie watching clubs with my roommates every Friday night, and just really trying to stay sane. I personally have worked from home for the last 3 years of my life, so my day-to-day is not super duper changed, but just got to get creative with staying sane, which I'm sure you guys are very familiar with.
Definitely,
most definitely. But hey, Ben, we really appreciate you taking some time here to join Doug and I. It's been quite the pleasure.
Yeah, thank you guys for finally having me on. I'm glad we were able to chat and hopefully give you guys some good answers.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah,
I mean,
most definitely.
We're glad you haven't lost your mind yet. But look forward to seeing what movies you've been watching on Letterboxd. I'll try and keep updating mine and make sure my stars are accurate. And I know some, I guess a mutual friend of ours may criticize some of my non-generous stars, but to each their own.
That's me too. I don't mean to blow you up, but you got some bad movie opinions, my friend.
It's all about the mood, but to each their own.
To each their own.
Just hope you and your loved ones are doing well, and Chris, let's bring it on home.
Yeah, so guys, let's remember to please feel free to send over any suggestions, questions, comments, or thoughts on any of our content by sending an email to wingspanpodcast@gmail.com. And do not forget to follow us on our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram accounts. And in addition, make sure you subscribe to our podcast on your preferred listening service.